task of rebuilding. With the victory firmly secured and Birais now under guerrillist control, Ruda, the astute leader, wasted no time in setting forth his vision for the future of the war-torn nation. Birais, once a proud and independent land, now found itself under the rule of guerrillist forces. The scars of conflict were visible everywhere, in the ruined buildings, the devastated countryside, and the faces of the bears who had survived the brutal war. Yet, despite the deep wounds, Ruda believed that Birais could rise from the ashes and emerge stronger than ever within the span of a decade. The task of rebuilding fell upon the shoulders of the civilians of Birais, a resilient and determined people who, despite the overwhelming destruction, refused to let their spirit be broken. The rebuilding efforts began almost immediately, with bears working tirelessly to reconstruct the structures and homes that had been reduced to rubble. Streets once filled with the sounds of war now echoed with the clang of hammers and the steady rhythm of rebuilding, a testament to the indomitable will of the Birais people. Each brick laid and each beam raised was a symbol of hope, a promise that Birais would rise again. The spirit of the bears remained unbroken, and as they worked side by side, they drew strength from one another, finding solace in the shared goal of rebuilding their homeland. The ruins of the war became the foundation for a new beginning, a future shaped by the determination and resilience of a people who had endured so much yet refused to be defeated. However, amidst the reconstruction efforts, a consequential demand emerged from the guerrillist authorities. Every citizen of Birais was required to surrender their weapons. From primitive tools like axes and machetes to any potentially deadly implements, all weapons were to be relinquished. Ruda, ever mindful of the potential threat posed by these tools in the hands of the resilient bears, sought to maintain control and ensure a smooth transition to guerrillist rule. He understood that the spirit of resistance still lingered among the bears, and he was determined to prevent any future uprisings that could jeopardize guerrillists' control over Birais. For the citizens of Birais, the demand to surrender their weapons was met with reluctance and apprehension. Weapons had long been a symbol of self-reliance and protection for the bears, a part of their culture and identity. To surrender them felt like a betrayal of their values and a surrender of their autonomy. Yet, faced with the overwhelming might of the guerrillist forces and the prospect of further conflict, many begrudgingly complied, understanding that resistance would only invite further hardship upon their already beleaguered nation. The act of relinquishing their weapons was a painful one, a symbolic surrender that cut deep into the hearts of the bears. Without their weapons, they felt vulnerable and exposed, their ability to defend themselves and their families diminished. But with General Blura no longer leading the people and their fighting spirit subdued, the citizens of Birais found themselves at a crossroads, grappling with the uncertainty of their future under guerrillist rule. The once proud bears, known for their fierce independence and resilience, now found themselves navigating unfamiliar territory, their destiny uncertain and their path forward shrouded in doubt. The loss of their weapons was more than just a physical disarmament. It was a psychological blow that left them feeling powerless and adrift in a world that had changed irrevocably. As they toiled tirelessly to rebuild their homes and communities, the bears of Birais found solace in the familiarity of their surroundings and the bonds of community that had sustained them through the darkest of times. They turned to one another for support, drawing strength from their shared experiences and the deep sense of camaraderie that had always been a hallmark of Birais society. Each brick lifted from the rubble was a testament to their determination to reclaim their homeland and rebuild their lives from the ruins of war. Yet, amidst the uncertainty and hardship, a glimmer of hope remained, a belief that, despite the challenges that lay ahead, Birais would endure. For the bears of Birais were a proud and resilient people, forged in the crucible of adversity and bound together by a shared determination to overcome whatever obstacles stood in their way. They knew that their journey would not be easy, but they also knew that they had faced difficult times before and had always emerged stronger. As they looked to the future, the bears of Birais knew that their journey would be long and fraught with challenges. The loss of their weapons, the destruction of their cities, and the shadow of guerrillist rule loomed large over their lives. But they also knew that the spirit of Birais, the spirit of resilience, determination, and hope, could never be extinguished. They faced the future with courage and resolve, determined to rebuild their nation, brick by brick, until Birais once again stood as a beacon of hope and resilience in a world ravaged by war. And though the road ahead was uncertain, the Bears of Birais held on to the belief that they would rise again. For in their hearts, they carried the legacy of their ancestors, a legacy of strength, honor, and an unbreakable will to survive. As long as they held on to that legacy, they knew that Birais would endure, and that one day, the nation would be restored to its former glory. The burden of decision. With Birais firmly under guerrillist control, Ruda, the shrewd and ambitious leader, wasted no time in turning his attention toward his next target, Wolfia. Having witnessed the devastating consequences of war in Birais, Ruda contemplated a different approach for dealing with Wolfia, a strategic diplomatic maneuver that required no bullets and claimed no lives. This plan was meant to force Wolfia into making a decision that would shape its destiny and, potentially, the future of the entire region. In the capital of Wolfia, President Heiser convened a crucial meeting with his top advisors and officials to discuss the nation's response to the looming threat of guerrillist expansion. The room was filled with tension, as the stakes could not have been higher. The advisors knew that whatever decision was made, it would carry profound consequences for the nation and its people. Option 1. War against the guerrillists. General Loco was the first to speak, his voice tinged with both urgency and defiance. As Wolfia's top military commander, he had always been a staunch advocate of the nation's sovereignty and independence. Mr. President, General Loco began, his tone resolute. Wolfia has always prided itself on its independence. We have faced threats before and have always emerged victorious. The guerrillists may be powerful, but they are not invincible. If we choose to fight, we can mobilize our forces, rally the people, and make the guerrillists pay dearly for any attempt to conquer our land. Pros of war. National honor. Defending the nation would uphold Wolfia's honor and demonstrate to the world that it would not bow to tyranny. Historical legacy. Preserving the legacy of independence and freedom, which has been a cornerstone of Wolfia's identity. Cons of war. Massive casualties. Given the military might of the guerrillists, the war would likely result in significant loss of life, both military and civilian. Economic ruin. The costs of war could devastate Wolfia's economy, leading to long-term instability and poverty. Risk of total destruction. Like Birais, Wolfia could face the complete annihilation of its cities and infrastructure. Minister of Defense. Karima supported General Loca's stance, but with a note of caution. We must also consider our current capabilities. Our military is well trained, but we lack the advanced weaponry and resources that the guerrillists possess. If we choose war, we must be prepared for a long and brutal conflict, with no guarantee of victory. Option 2. Surrender to the guerrillists. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Davos took the floor next, advocating for a more pragmatic approach. Known for his diplomatic acumen, Davos had always emphasized the importance of preserving peace whenever possible. Mr. President, Davos said calmly, we have seen what happened to Birais. The decision to fight led to untold suffering and destruction. We must consider the well-being of our people. Surrendering to the guerrillists may not be ideal, but it could spare Wolfia from the horrors of war and allow us to rebuild our nation under new terms. Pros of surrender. Preservation of life. Surrender would prevent the widespread death and suffering that war would inevitably bring. Economic stability. By avoiding war, Wolfia could maintain its infrastructure and avoid the economic devastation that war would cause. Opportunity for negotiation. Surrender could open the door to negotiations that might allow Wolfia to retain some level of autonomy under guerrillist rule. Cons of surrender. Loss of sovereignty. Surrendering would mean giving up Wolfia's independence and possibly living under harsh terms dictated by the guerrillists. National shame. The decision to surrender could be seen as a betrayal of Wolfia's legacy of independence, leading to internal strife and resentment among the population. Uncertain future. Even with a negotiated surrender, there is no guarantee that the guerrillists would honor any agreements made, leading to potential future oppression. Minister of the Interior, Marin, a close ally of Davos, nodded in agreement. We must think of the people first, Mr. President. We are not just talking about soldiers on the battlefield, we are talking about families, children, and the elderly. War would bring unimaginable suffering to them. Is that a price we are willing to pay? The heated debate. The discussion grew more intense as Chief Advisor Orrin took the floor, a figure known for his ability to weigh both sides of an argument. There is no doubt that we face an impossible choice, Orrin said, his voice steady. But we must also consider the long-term implications. If we surrender, we must ensure that we do so under terms that allow us to maintain our culture and identity. The guerrillists may demand much, but if we negotiate wisely, we could preserve what matters most. General Loco responded sharply, "You speak of negotiation, but what leverage do we have? The guerrillists are not known for their mercy. They see us as an obstacle, not as equals. If we surrender, we risk becoming nothing more than a vassal state, stripped of our dignity and forced to live under the thumb of a foreign power." Minister Karima added, "We need to ask ourselves, what is the price of freedom? Is it worth the potential annihilation of our nation? Or is there a way to preserve our people and culture, even if it means sacrificing some of our independence?" President Heiser listened carefully, his mind weighed down by the arguments from both sides. The decision before him was agonizingly complex, with no clear path forward. Each option presented a mix of potential benefits and devastating consequences. The final consideration. In the midst of the heated debate, President Heiser finally spoke, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. This decision will define the future of Wolfia. It is not one to be taken lightly. We must consider not only the immediate consequences, but also the legacy we leave for future generations. Whether we choose to fight or to surrender, we must do so with the full understanding of what it means for our people, our nation, and our place in history. The room fell silent as the weight of President Heiser's words settled over the assembly. The advisors and officials knew that the time for debate was drawing to a close and that the moment of decision was at hand. President Heiser's eyes scanned the faces of those gathered, searching for a sign, a spark of clarity in the midst of the uncertainty. But the truth was that there could be no easy answers in such tumultuous times. The fate of Wolfia hung in the balance, and whatever path they chose, it would be a decision that would resonate through the ages. As the meeting drew to a close, President Heiser knew that the final decision rested with him alone. The burden of leadership weighed heavily on his shoulders, but he was determined to face it with the courage and resolve that had always defined Wolfia's leaders. The nation looked to him for guidance, and he knew that whatever path he chose, it would be one that would shape the destiny of Wolfia. A nation divided, the referendum for peace. In the hushed chambers of Wolfia's presidential palace, President Heiser, flanked by his most trusted advisors and senior officials, faced a pivotal moment in the nation's history. The guerrillists' demand for disarmament had brought the nation to a crossroads, presenting President Heiser with a critical decision that would shape the destiny of Wolfia and its people for years to come. The stakes were high, and the consequences of either path were uncertain. Rather than impose a unilateral decision, President Heiser, with a firm belief in democracy and the voice of the people, proposed an unprecedented course of action, letting the citizens of Wolfia decide their fate through a nationwide referendum. The decision underscored Wolfia's commitment to democratic principles, placing the power of the nation's future in the hands of its people. The campaigns began. As the referendum date approached, the nation was swept up in a fervor of political activity. Campaigns were launched on both sides, each vying to sway public opinion toward their cause. Heated debates filled town squares, community halls, and the airwaves as citizens passionately argued the merits of war versus surrender. Nora, a respected teacher and mother of two, emerged as a vocal advocate for surrender. She spoke with deep emotion at town meetings, urging her fellow citizens to consider the consequences of war. "We have seen what happened to Birais," she pleaded, her voice cracking with the weight of her words. "Their cities are in ruins, their people devastated. We cannot allow the same fate to befall our children. Peace is the only way to protect our future." Across the debate, Victor, a decorated war veteran and owner of a small business, rallied the voices calling for resistance. "Wolfia has never bowed to tyranny," Victor thundered at a rally in the capital. Our ancestors fought for our freedom, and we must do the same. Surrender is not peace, it is submission. If we give in now, we lose more than our weapons. We lose our pride, our sovereignty, our very identity as a free people. The heated discussions. As the day of the referendum drew near, tensions in Wolfia reached a boiling point. In the heart of the capital, citizens gathered in cafes and public squares, passionately debating the two starkly different futures that lay before them. At one such gathering, Merrick, a young factory worker, argued fervently for war. "We have the strength to fight," he insisted. "We cannot let the guerrillists dictate our lives. If we surrender, what will stop them from taking more? Today it's our weapons, tomorrow it's our freedom." But Elena, a retired nurse and grandmother, countered his argument with a quiet, determined resolve. "I've seen enough death in my lifetime, Merrick. War is not the answer. Think of the children, the families. Is our pride worth more than their lives?" The debate raged on, with citizens from all walks of life grappling with the gravity of the decision. Gregor, a farmer from the northern region, summed up the dilemma faced by many. "I don't want to surrender, but I don't want to see my land and my family destroyed either. We're caught between a rock and a hard place." The referendum. On the day of the referendum, a somber atmosphere settled over the nation. From the bustling cities to the quiet countryside, citizens cast their votes, each ballot carrying the weight of their hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. The lines at polling stations were long, with people of all ages and backgrounds participating in what they knew would be a historic moment. In the capital, President Heiser watched as the votes were counted, the tension in the room palpable. His advisors, each with their own biases and concerns, hovered nearby, awaiting the outcome that would determine the fate of Wolfia. As the final votes were tallied, it became clear that the nation was deeply divided. The result was a narrow victory for the side advocating for surrender. A mere fraction of a percentage point separated the two sides. The aftermath. When the results were announced, the nation held its breath. The side that had called for surrender had won by the slimmest of margins, securing a victory that was both celebrated and mourned. Nora wept tears of relief, knowing that her children would not have to face the horrors of war. She hugged her neighbors, sharing in the bittersweet victory that promised peace, but at the cost of Wolfia's pride. Victor, though disappointed, accepted the outcome with the stoic dignity that had defined his years of service. "The people have spoken," he said quietly, "and we must honor their choice. But we will not forget who we are. Even in surrender, we remain Wolfians." A new chapter. President Heiser, reflecting on the outcome, knew that the path forward would be fraught with challenges. The decision to surrender had averted war, but it had also left the nation with deep wounds that would take time to heal. He addressed the nation in a televised speech, acknowledging the pain of the decision while urging unity and resilience. "Today, we have chosen peace," he said. But peace is not the absence of struggle. It is the opportunity to rebuild, to grow, and to forge a new future for our children. We must stand together as one nation and work to ensure that Wolfia remains a land of hope, freedom, and opportunity. The referendum had laid bare the divisions within Wolfia, but it had also affirmed the strength of its democratic values. The choice had been made, and now it was time to move forward toward reconciliation, rebuilding, and a future where the scars of war might finally begin to heal. And so, with the vote decided, Wolfia entered a new chapter in its history. The path ahead was uncertain, but the people of Wolfia, resilient and determined, would face it together, united in their quest for peace and prosperity. Forging unity amidst diversity. Ruda's leisurely stroll through the streets of Lizi, the capital of Wolfia, offered him a rare moment of respite from the unrelenting demands of conquest and governance. The city was alive with the vibrant pulse of everyday life, merchants haggling over goods, children playing in the streets, and citizens of all walks of life going about their business. It was a scene that could have belonged to any prosperous, peaceful city. Yet, beneath the surface, Lizi bore the invisible weight of recent conquest, and Ruda, the architect of this new order, felt the burden of his grand ambition pressing heavily upon him. The conquest of Wolfia had been achieved without the devastation that had befallen Birais, yet Ruda knew that this was only the beginning of a far more complex and challenging task: the unification of the conquered nations under the guerrillist banner. As he observed the diverse inhabitants of Wolfia, Ruda's thoughts turned inward, contemplating the monumental challenge of fostering a lasting unity among peoples as different as the lions of Leoniais, the tigers of Tajera, the bears of Birais, and the wolves of Wolfia. It is not enough to simply conquer, Ruda mused as he walked, his mind churning with the complexities of the task ahead. Conquest is but a fleeting victory if it does not lead to something greater, something enduring. Ruda understood that the true challenge lay not in subjugating these nations, but in unifying them, a task that would require more than military might. It would demand an understanding of the deep-seated differences in race, culture, and history that defined each nation, and the ability to weave these diverse threads into a single, cohesive fabric. The guerrillist regime now ruled over 4 nations, each with its own unique identity and sense of pride. The tigers of Tajera were fierce and independent, their loyalty earned, not demanded. The lions of Leoniais, regal and proud, valued their traditions and viewed themselves as the natural leaders of any coalition. The bears of Birais, though battered and broken, possessed a resilience that could not be ignored. And the wolves of Wolfia, known for their cunning and unity, were wary of outsiders but fiercely loyal to their own. As he walked through the streets of Lizi, Ruda engaged with the people, listening to their stories, their concerns, and their hopes for the future. He spoke with an elderly wolf who reminisced about the days before the guerrillist rule, expressing both sorrow for what had been lost and cautious optimism for what might be gained. He conversed with a young lioness who spoke of her desire for peace and prosperity, but also of her fear that the guerrillist regime would strip away her nation's identity. Through these interactions, Ruda began to see the common threads that could serve as the foundation for a united guerrillist empire. Despite their differences, the people of these nations shared a desire for stability, security, and the opportunity to thrive. They wanted peace after years of conflict, and they were willing to work towards it if they could see a future that respected their identities and gave them a stake in the new order. Yet, Ruda was acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. The scars of war were fresh, and mistrust lingered in the hearts of many. The lions, tigers, bears, and wolves had long histories of rivalry and conflict, and uniting them under a single flag would require careful diplomacy, genuine reconciliation, and a vision that could inspire loyalty across the divides of species and culture. Ruda knew that he would need to create a shared sense of purpose, a common identity that transcended the individual histories of these nations. This new identity could not be imposed from above. It would need to emerge organically, nurtured by policies that promoted inclusion, respect, and mutual benefit. He envisioned a future where the guerrillist empire was not merely a collection of conquered territories, but a true union of nations working together for the common good. But how could such unity be achieved? How could he convince the lions of Leoniais to see themselves as equal partners with the tigers of Tajera? How could he heal the deep wounds of Birais, whose people had suffered so greatly, and bring them into the fold? And how could he ensure that the wolves of Wolfia, now facing the reality of guerrillist rule, would see this new era as an opportunity rather than a threat? These questions weighed heavily on Ruda as he continued his walk through Lizi. He knew that his success as a leader would be measured not by the battles he had won, but by the lasting peace he could create. The challenge of uniting these diverse nations under one flag was immense, but Ruda was not one to shy away from difficult tasks. He resolved to approach this challenge with the same determination and strategic thinking that had brought him victory on the battlefield. As he returned to his quarters, Ruda's mind was already at work, formulating plans to foster unity among the conquered nations. He knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with difficulties, but he was confident that with the right approach, the dream of a united guerrillist empire could become a reality. In the quiet of his room, Ruda sat down to pen his thoughts, sketching out ideas for cultural exchanges, shared governance structures, and economic initiatives that could bring the nations closer together. He wrote about the importance of education in fostering a new generation that saw themselves not as lions, tigers, bears, or wolves, but as citizens of a greater whole. And he reflected on the need for empathy and understanding, qualities that, while often seen as weaknesses in the realm of power, were essential for the kind of unity he sought to build. As he wrote, Ruda felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The task before him was daunting, but it was also the greatest challenge of his life. And as he laid out his vision for a united guerrillist empire, he knew that this was the true test of his leadership, a test that would determine whether his legacy would be one of mere conquest, or of lasting peace and prosperity for all under his rule.